I'd like to start off this morning. I thought I'd go over that joke really quickly. I'll give you a chance to laugh or not laugh. I'd like to start off this morning by sharing a story of a young officer, a merchant seaman named David Blair. He had spent weeks preparing a brand new passenger ship for its first voyage. It was one of the most advanced vessels of its time, and the world was buzzing with excitement about its journey. And Blair was proud to be a part of the crew. But just before the ship set sail, Blair was unexpectedly reassigned to a different ship. He packed his things quickly and left the ship in a hurry. Blair had been told to hand everything over before he left, but in the busyness of the moment, he failed to follow through. It was a small instruction, but it had devastating consequences. In his rush, he forgot to turn in a small key, one that opened a specific locker on board the ship. No one noticed at the time. And as the voyage began, the ship sailed smoothly through the Atlantic. However, on one cold night, disaster struck. The lookouts had been scanning the horizon, but without the tools they usually relied on. They didn't spot the danger ahead of them. If only they'd had access to the equipment locker that was locked. If only Blair had done the one small thing he was supposed to do, return the key. The ship struck an iceberg and sank. Over 1,500 people, passengers lost their lives. That forgotten key, it unlocked the binoculars in the crow's nest. And the ship, the Titanic. One of the surviving crew members later said that if they'd had binoculars, they likely would have spotted the iceberg in time to change course. Maybe. If Blair had remembered to turn in that key as he was instructed to, things may have been different. Maybe. I don't know. So we are once again doing our series called Persons of Interest. This is our 12th season of sharing about people from the Bible who are somewhat obscure or just not that well known. These are characters that are not given major roles in Scripture, but whose lives give us a glimpse into God's character and possibly teach us something relevant about the Christian journey. Last week, we looked at the impact of Naaman's wife's servant girl and the impact she had on Naaman. If you recall, Naaman was the commander of the army of Aram. They were fighting Israel, and he had leprosy. Our young servant girl suggested that Naaman go see the prophet in Samaria to be healed. He followed her advice. He was healed, and then he proclaimed God, the God of Israel, as the only God. His absence from Scripture after that miraculous event may suggest that his life was transformed. I concluded that the servant girl was a catalyst. Her simple suggestion started something big in the life of Naaman. Our push was for all of us to be a catalyst for those around us. The nudge was for us to be a witness for God by our words and actions for the purpose of helping move people towards God. We never know what small word or action will draw a person closer to Christ. Well, a person of interest this week is Naaman himself. Not a total unknown to us now that we kind of spoke about him last week, but he is mentioned substantially in only one chapter of the Bible, 2 Kings chapter 5. He's mentioned in 3 other verses, 2 of which as a part of a list of descendants in 1 Chronicles, and then once in the New Testament in Luke chapter 4. He's mentioned there as the only person Elijah ever healed with leprosy. So we're going to spend some time this month looking at 2 Kings chapter 5 and looking at Naaman and the people around him. And we're going to continue where we left off from last week's passage in 2 Kings chapter 5. And what we learned about Naaman was that he was well respected, a mighty warrior, the commander of the army for Aram, and he had leprosy. At the suggestion of his wife's servant girl, he got a letter of introduction from his king, the king of Aram, to go see the king of Israel and go get healed. And that's where we left him. So let's read our passage for this week, and we'll start with verse 6. We're going to read all the way through to 14 eventually, but we're going to chunk this out. And so we'll start with verse 6, which we read last week, kind of gives us where we left off. So 2 Kings chapter 5, 6 and 7. The letter to the king of Israel said, "With this letter, I present my servant Naaman. I want you to heal him of his leprosy." And when the king of Israel read the letter, he tore his clothes in dismay and said, "Am I God that I can give life and take it away? Why is this man asking me to heal someone with leprosy? I can see that he's just trying to pick a fight with me." In verse 7, we open up with the king of Israel being afraid, being scared. And he's really scared. That's why he tore his clothes. And the guy he was afraid of, the guy who had been raiding his country and taking the Israelites back to be slaves, his people, was now standing before him with tons of money and a letter asking to be healed. So, of course, the king of Israel thought it was a plot of some sort. He was thinking that Naaman did not have his best interests in mind. He probably thought that the kingdom of Aram was going to blame him for not healing Naaman and then launch a full-scale invasion. Or perhaps he was thinking that he may be killed right then and there if he didn't do what Naaman wanted. It seemed like a lose-lose situation for him. And you know what a lose-lose situation is. It's a situation you can't win. Every morning I face a lose-lose situation. There's no way I can win. I have a young lady in my home that feels the need to wake me up early or to wake me up before I'm ready to get up. I set 2 alarms, 15 minutes apart, just in case I accidentally turn the first one off. I don't hit snooze. I have 2 separate ones. I set 2 alarms, 15 minutes apart, and I don't need help waking up. But after the first alarm goes off, this lovely girl does everything to get me out of bed, knowing there's a second alarm coming in 15 minutes. She knows this. I just need those 15 minutes to be uninterrupted. But she can't wait. She literally jumps on the bed to annoy me to get up. Every morning, it's a lose-lose with this young lady. Of course, I'm talking about the cat, not Gail. I mean, I don't know where you guys were going. But this cat, oh my gosh, every morning, like yesterday, it was, you know how cats scratch their bed? It was my butt. She was like, no, I don't want to get up. All right. Fortunately for the king of Israel, who thought he was facing a lose-lose situation with Naaman in this letter, fortunate for him, Elijah, the prophet, enters the story and intervenes. So let's look at verse 8 and 9. But when Elijah, the man of God, heard that the king of Israel had torn his clothes in dismay, he sent this message to him. "Why are you so upset? Send Naaman to me, and he will learn that there is a true prophet here in Israel." So Naaman went with his horses and chariots and waited at the door of Elijah's house. The king of Israel was scared. He could only focus on the perceived threat of the king of Aram in his mind. He did not believe God could deliver them from their enemies. Remember, the northern kingdom kings after this time, none of them believed or worshiped God. They were leading Israel away from God. All right? So he couldn't believe that God would deliver them from their enemies, let alone heal a man with a skin disease. Elijah, with an S, was confident that God was going to be able to do a mighty work and requested Naaman to come see him. Naaman and his men went to see Elijah. And just to recap here, the prophet, I'm going to do this with sign, the prophet Elijah with an S, my kind of signing, not American signing, but mine. So Elijah with an S was the replacement of the successor to the prophet, or he was also the successor to the prophet Elijah with a J. Elijah with an S was Elijah's understudy. Elijah had been taken up to heaven in a chariot of fire, and Elijah received all the power God had given to Elijah. Elijah's ministry, his miracles, were more dramatic and confrontational. Elijah's miracles were more relational and compassionate. Elijah was flamboyant. Elijah often worked quietly behind the scenes. Elijah was a different kind of prophet, as we'll see here in verse 10. And I'm going to stop doing this, okay? Because we're going to be talking about Elijah the rest of the time, so I don't need to do it. All right. So let's get to verses 10 through 12. But Elijah sent a messenger out to him, Naaman, with this message. "Go and wash yourself 7 times in the Jordan River. Then your skin will be restored, and you will be healed of your leprosy." But Naaman became angry and stalked away. "I thought he would certainly come out to meet me," he said. "I expected him to wave his hand over the leprosy and call on the name of the Lord his God and heal me. Aren't the rivers of Damascus, the Abana, and the Pharpar better than any of the rivers of Israel? Why shouldn't I wash in them and be healed?" So Naaman turned and went away in a rage. Elijah sends a messenger out to deliver to Naaman the remedy for his leprosy. Elijah does not come out of his house to deliver the remedy himself. That seems a little odd, right? Can you imagine how Naaman felt? He traveled all this way with a ton of gifts for the prophet, for Elijah. 750 pounds of silver, 150 pounds of gold, 10 sets of clothing. And Elijah did not personally meet with him. He sent a messenger in his place. I would be ticked. I think raging off is not that far off maybe what I would do. I mean, I would be at least disappointed. When Gail and I took the family to backpacking through Europe, we eventually made our way to London, and there were several spots, iconic spots we wanted to see. The Tower Bridge, right? It's awesome. It's amazing. The Tower of London, right? This thing is really interesting, and that's where the polar bears were. No joke, they had polar bears. I'm not kidding. All right. I'm looking at the guy from UK, and he's just like, he's not, you don't know? You should know. I'm not pointing them out. All right. We also went to Buckingham Palace. You got to go see the changing of the guards. We went to, Westminster Abbey. And if you go, they'll let you take communion with them. This is an amazing place to remember the mighty act that Christ did on the cross. And we were in London. And remember how Naaman was disappointed that Elisha wouldn't come out to see him. He was disappointed. I was a little bit disappointed because the most iconic thing there is about London, I think, we were going to go see, and this is what it looked like. Big Ben, the Elizabeth Tower, was all in scaffolding and covered up, and I was so disappointed. It was the first and probably the last time we would get to see Big Ben, and because I don't know when we're going to go to London again, but Ben looked like this, so I was kind of disappointed. You know, we all have been disappointed because our expectations were not met. Naaman was more than just disappointed. He was angry. He had traveled a long way expecting something great. He got the remedy from some guy, not the prophet, and he thought it was a joke. And the remedy itself sounded too simple to be effective. Go and wash yourself 7 times in the Jordan River. Then your skin will be restored and you'll be healed of your leprosy. That's it. Naaman was looking for some hocus pocus stuff, some effort. He wanted Elijah to wave his hands around and say something magical. Naaman even thought dipping in the Jordan River was ridiculous. He named 2 hometown rivers that he thought were better. So he left in a rage. Fortunately for Naaman, he had his men with him. And in verse 13, we see what his men do. But his officers tried to reason with him and said, "Sir, if the prophet had told you to do something very difficult, wouldn't you have done it? So you should certainly obey him when he says simply, 'Go and wash and be cured.'" Just a side point, how important is it to surround yourselves with good friends? People that will talk you down when you're raging or crashing out. Just something to think about. If you have a friend like that sitting next to you, go ahead and just turn to him right now and say, "Thank you." All right, Naaman's men try to talk some sense into him. They try to convince him to give this simple remedy a shot. You know, what harm would there be just to try it? Just jump in the river. You know, I've got some I've got some weird skin stuff going on, and I would love just to go down to a river, jump in it 7 times, and get that cleared up. Maybe not this river, that river, the Daejeon. I'm not sure that's the cleanest. And maybe that was Naaman. Maybe Naaman thought the Jordan wasn't that clean or whatever. But I know our river, 2 miles upstream, there's a water treatment plant. So I don't know that I want to get in that. But if I had leprosy and someone said, go jump in the river, I'd go jump in that river easily. So Naaman was really convinced that Elijah's remedy was a joke. And this really gets to the main point of the talk today. When God calls us to do something, we often tweak his instructions to make it more palatable for ourselves. He says, do this, and we do something adjacent that we think may be easier, more comfortable, a workaround. We hear God, we know what he wants, but we go off and do something else. We do it our way. Or worse, we go off ignoring the instructions or forgetting about it. Kind of like what David Blair did with that key for the binoculars on the Titanic. If he'd only followed instructions, maybe things would have changed. We often think we know what God wants us to do, but sometimes our assumptions are very different from what God has actually said. We rely on our own ideas and expectations. So when things unfold in a way we didn't expect, we become frustrated, just like Naaman did. Following Christ is not about managing expectations. It's about faith through obedience, submitting to God's plan even when it doesn't make sense to us, even if others would make fun of us or mock us for going with God's crazy plan, even if it would cost us greatly. Submitting to God and his plan is the right course simply because we know whatever God has for us is the best we can get. We have expectations, we have plans, but God has a better plan, better than we could ever imagine. Some of you may be familiar with a highly successful Christian musician named Rich Mullins. He was popular in the 1990s, known for writing worship classics, most famous for writing the song, and we sang it the first song today, Awesome God. He could have lived in luxury from his music royalties, but instead he felt convicted that following Jesus meant living simply and humbly. So what did he do? He told his accountant, don't tell me how much money I make, just pay me the average salary of a working class man. Give the rest away to charity. This was in the 90s. He was worth millions, but he lived on what he thought was a working class man's salary, $24,000 a year, USD. That's not a lot. This wasn't a publicity stunt. He lived in a small house on a Navajo reservation, teaching music to Native American kids, far from the spotlight. People in the industry thought he was crazy to walk away from fame and money. But to Rich, it was obedience. For the world, that just doesn't make sense. Here's a quote from Rich. If you want a religion that makes sense, then I suggest something other than Christianity. But if you want a religion that makes life, then I think this is the one. Rich lived a life of obedience. He lived a life the way he thought God wanted him to live. So what did Naaman do with this crazy, simple remedy for his leprosy? He's convinced by his men to give it a shot. Verse 14. So Naaman went down to the Jordan River and dipped himself 7 times as the man of God had instructed him. And his skin became as healthy as the skin of a young child, and he was healed. Naaman was healed because he submitted to what Elijah told him to do. He submitted to what God wanted him to do. Nobody likes the word submit or submission. It's a 4-letter word to them. Most people want to control their own direction. They want to do what they want to do, but that doesn't always go well for them. It's like a person who's on a road trip. His phone's GPS is giving him clear direction, but he thinks he knows a shortcut. So he ignores the GPS and decides to take his own way. 10 minutes later, He's lost. Then he runs out of gas. Then his phone dies. He ends up having to walk a long distance to get gas. The shortcut cost him time, energy, and a whole lot of frustration. Too many believers do this with God too often. They think they know a better route. They silence the GPS of God's word, thinking, I've got this. But their shortcut leads to delays, dead ends, and unnecessary pain. God doesn't give directions to control us. He gives them to us to protect and guide us. Let's listen to some wisdom, one from the Old Testament, one from the New Testament, about submitting to God. This is Proverbs chapter 3, 5 through 6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways, submit to him, and he will make your paths straight. He will direct your paths. His ways are the most valuable ways, and he wants to lead you towards what's best for you and his kingdom. Here's the other one from the New Testament, Matthew 16:24. Then Jesus said to his disciples, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves, take up their cross, and follow me. Being a disciple starts with denying yourself, not doing it your way, and then following Christ by learning to be obedient. And here's the truth. Submission to God isn't about giving up. It's about giving over. Giving over our fears, our pride, our plans, our control to the one who sees the whole picture. It's trusting that God's way is better than our way, even when we don't understand it, even when we can't see it, even when it doesn't make sense. Have you ever seen a toddler insist on carrying a backpack? I mean, it's adorable, right? At first. You know, the backpack is twice their size. They put it on. It's got all the really important stuff, you know, juice, snacks, toys. They wobble as they walk, and then every 5 steps they fall, and they refuse anyone's help, yelling, I can do it. I can do it. Meanwhile, you as the parent is right there, arms open, saying, I can carry that for you. But the toddler's pride is stronger than their muscles. Eventually, after a dramatic fall, possibly a tantrum, they finally give in. And when they hand it over, suddenly they're free. Skipping, smiling, hands in the air like life is amazing. No longer burdened by their decisions. Submission to God isn't about giving up, it's about giving over. And once you surrender to God, whatever it is you're wrestling with in your life, you can begin to rest from its entanglements. Our invitation today is simple but powerful. Stop wrestling and start resting. Stop fighting his call and commands and start trusting that he's got you. True peace, true purpose, true power comes when we finally say, not my will, but yours be done. May our lives be fully submitted to the one who gave it all for us. So, just a reminder of what we've sort of talked about today. Faith through obedience, submitting to God's plan, even when it doesn't make sense to us. Submission to God isn't about giving up, it's about giving over. Stop wrestling, start resting. So we're going to go into a time of reflection here. And so as we pause and just pray, think about, what are you wrestling with? What is the things in your life that are heavy, that seem to take all your focus? How is giving that over to God possible? How will that release you from its entanglements? So let's just think about the things that we've sort of are holding on to too tightly. Maybe trying to do our own thing and not really trying to do what God is calling us to do. So let's just spend a moment reflecting.